The Defense Secretary says Britain is willing to work with the Taliban if it enters government in Afghanistan, as long as it doesn't behave in a way that is seriously against human rights. NTD's Joy Duguid brings us more on this.
Ben Wallace is visiting Washington, D.C. to hold talks with his counterpart, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. He expressed disappointment at President Biden's decision to withdraw U.S. forces from Afghanistan, saying the rest of the international community had little choice but to follow suit. Talking to the Daily Telegraph, the Defense Secretary said Britain is willing to work with the Taliban if it becomes government in Afghanistan, as long as it follows international norms. But he said the UK will review the relationship if the Taliban behave in a way that is seriously against human rights. During the 20-year-long conflict in Afghanistan, 457 British personnel have lost their lives. Wallace said the war on terror has been a success, as it weakened Al-Qaeda and its ability to launch terror attacks in Europe.
We had, after a few years, almost no attacks or inspired plots from Al-Qaeda on the streets of Europe and the United Kingdom, and that matters, and you bank that.
Wallace appealed for the Taliban and the Afghan government to work together to bring stability to the country after decades of conflict. The US withdrawal of forces is expected to finish by the end of August. The Taliban claimed last week it now controls 85% of the country's territory. Joy Duguid, NTD News.
More countries across Europe are deliberating over pandemic restrictions. France announced Monday that workers in some industries must receive a vaccine against the CCP virus. But some say this is a mark of an authoritative government. NTD's France correspondent David Vivez brings us the details.
On Monday, French President Emmanuel Macron announced that CCP virus vaccines will be mandatory for all healthcare workers. According to Macron's order, workers have until September 15th to get the shot. Unvaccinated workers will face sanctions, like fines or having their pay suspended. According to journalist and author Jean Robin, the move is reminiscent of an authoritative government.
People in the healthcare system will have to be vaccinated, otherwise they won't be paid. This is how it works in communist China, and this is how it works in France now.
In China, different reports show the vaccine was forced on people, either directly or indirectly. For example, in the coastal city Hainan, the municipal government began blacklisting residents who refused to be vaccinated. In his book, France, a Colony of Communist China, Robin explores similarities between the French government and the Chinese Communist Party. He says the mandatory measure is about forcing the people, and it discriminates against people who are not vaccinated. Robin says this is just like how the CCP manages the Chinese people.
The principles remain the same, which is to control people, to make them do what you want, like for vaccination. All the people who don't want to be vaccinated won't be able to go to restaurants, won't be able to go to theaters, won't be able to go anywhere. So it's really a mandatory system, even though they say it's not. Just like Communist China say, it's not mandatory, it's just for improving the life of everybody.
The vaccine mandate may extend to all of France, as Macron's goal is 100% vaccination for the country. And more governments are considering the hard line with the vaccine, particularly in Europe. The UK will mandate vaccines this October for healthcare staff, while Italy and Greece have already made the move. David Vivez, NTD News, Paris.
Jean Robin ending that report by our France correspondent David Vivez. Turkey marks the 5th anniversary of the 2016 failed coup. It saw the government respond with a massive purge, detaining hundreds of thousands of people. NTD's Joy Duguid has the story.
Turkey marks the 5th anniversary of the 2016 failed coup against Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan's government. During the coup, government buildings were bombed, including Parliament, and at least 265 people were killed. An official said 161 of them were mostly civilians and police officers, while the remaining 104 were coup supporters. The president's ruling AK party says the coup was planned by supporters of US-based cleric Fethullah Gulen. Gulen denies any involvement. The AK party says Gulen's supporters were deeply embedded in Turkey's institutions. They launched a widespread crackdown on his network. Since the failed coup, Turkey has detained nearly 300,000 people with alleged links to Gulen. According to data released by Turkey's Interior Ministry, nearly 100,000 of them were jailed pending trial. Some 150,000 civil servants were sacked or suspended after the coup, including academics, teachers, health workers and prison guards. Courts have handed down more than 2,500 life sentences. 5 years on, police operations targeting suspects accused of links to Gulen are continuing on a regular basis. The government says only a massive purge could neutralise the threat by a network of Gulen supporters. But the extent of the crackdown has worried rights groups and many of Turkey's Western allies. They fear Erdogan is using the emergency rule to eradicate dissent. Joy Dugid, NTD News.
EU leaders are grouping together to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. They've set out an ambitious connectivity plan that starts in 2022. NTD's Patrick Hayden brings us this report.
The EU is creating an infrastructure strategy to develop transport and trade routes. It's called a Globally Connected Europe and starts in 2022. It's been set up to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Countries around the world are having to deal with China's Belt and Road Initiative. It's just been so enormously successful in buying off individual countries.
One asset manager says the EU's project is an opportunity for countries to distance themselves from China and take back some of the geopolitical gains that China has made in recent years.
I'm surprised that more Western governments aren't trying to establish some kind of clear water between their own economies and China rather than do exactly the opposite.
Price says Western governments should treat China as an adversary. The EU has recently struck deals in transportation, energy and digital projects with Japan and India, and infrastructure was also discussed at the recent G7 meeting. Concerns have been that China's Belt and Road Initiative is entrapping economically vulnerable countries. European banks are discussing taking on Montenegro's debt from China. But Price has concerns about the EU and governments in general taking on more debt, which has accelerated since the pandemic.
These are governments that are spending money hand over fist on infrastructure projects that can't be afforded.
Montenegro borrowed nearly $1 billion from China and defaulted on repayments, resulting in penalties. Armstrong says when it comes to global politics, though, £1 billion here and £1 billion there doesn't amount to much.
This isn't just about development, this is also about national security, European security. I think the ability to keep China excluded from having a stranglehold over a European country is a bargain for £1 billion.
China has launched construction projects in over 60 countries since 2013. Beijing denies that these projects deliver any political power. It says they are for the needs of ordinary people. Patrick Hayden, NTD News, London.
France is fining Google £425 million in a dispute over paying news publishers for content. Officials say Google didn't comply with rules on how to hold talks with French news publishers. But Google says it had always acted in good faith, and the penalty ignored the reality of how news works on its platforms. It says it's very disappointed with the new ruling, but will comply. It now has 2 months to come up with proposals on how to pay news publishers. If it fails to do that, it will face fines of up to £750,000 per day. The Royal Shakespeare Company has built a new theatre next to the River Avon, and this week embarks on its first full-scale production in front of a live audience since last year. NTD's Natalia Nating brings us more on this.
The Royal Shakespeare Company opened an outdoor theatre with a new version of the Comedy of Errors on Tuesday. Its first full-scale production in front of a live audience in over a year. Based in playwright William Shakespeare's birthplace of Stratford-upon-Avon, the company, known as the RSC, built the new theatre by the River Avon.
You know, it's a beautiful spot here in Stratford. We're right by the river right here now. And so we get some heckling from some swans occasionally, all that kind of stuff. But I guess this is what happened 400 years ago. You know, there weren't too many roofs around and stuff like that in the theatre then.
The Comedy of Errors had been due to begin performances in April 2020, but the RSC had to close its doors to live audiences due to the pandemic.
I felt there are two really powerful reasons to build this theatre, one of which was as a sort of symbol, a symbol of regeneration and of opening up, but also as a transition, so that people will feel very comfortable sitting outside in the open air.
Under the Prime Minister's roadmap out of lockdown, entertainment venues in England have been welcoming audiences back since mid-May at 50% capacity. From Monday, they will no longer face restrictions on numbers.
I think because we're so used to being outside and in the fresh air, and you'll just feel safe. And evening like this, but we've come prepared with waterproof coats and everything.
The RSC's open-air theatre can sit 500 people and is showing The Comedy of Errors until the end of September. Natalia Nutting, NTD News.
That's the news for today, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Stuart Lees. Thank you for watching our daily news show on YouTube. You can also watch our other programming on channel 190 on Sky TV or on Freeview via channel box on channel 271. In the meantime though, please give this video a like and hit subscribe to our channel. Have a good day.